This episode is scripted by Newell Fisher with script assistance by John Ruths and is narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello and welcome to the delayed Watership Down podcast episode 70, another milestone in which we will be going through section 11 of the 1978 film Nuthanger Farm. I apologise for the delay in releasing this episode. This was because I was away celebrating our wedding anniversary with my beautiful wife after a difficult week. This has been our first extended break since becoming carers and our first proper break in any case in a year. We should be back on track in the next episode. Just some brief borough keeping. On Twitter, I've had a message from writer and ecologist Professor David Morley saying how much he likes the podcast, which is fantastic. Twitter has not been a big source of feedback up to now, so it's good to see this. I also said I couldn't do it without the rest of the team, because this podcast is a team effort, and all the better for it. See episode 69 for further details. I've also had a comment on YouTube from a listener expressing disappointment that I'm not just reading out each chapter from the book in each episode, and saying that my episodes on the book should be called, quote, understanding chapter whatever, end quote. I have been very clear from the start, more or less, that this podcast is not a substitute for reading the books or watching the films of Watership Down, which is why I include spoilers. From time to time, I like to introduce a sense of tension, as if we all don't know what is coming next, but that is just for fun. I'm not into breaching copyright. This is and will remain a completely free podcast in which all contributors are paid purely by being credited for their work, and which is made purely out of love and appreciation for Watership Down. If you want to read, listen to or watch Watership Down, please pay to do so. The brief sound clips I've used in recent episodes fall under fair use, so they are not a copyright issue. I'm also aware that both the 1978 film and 1999 TV series are available free on YouTube in low definition, but I will never provide such extended free content. Anyway, having said all the above, let's go down to the farm. Section 11. Nuthanger Farm. This section covers from 32 minutes 20 to 36 minutes 20, and the equivalent chapter from the book is chapter 24, Nuthanger Farm. So now we come to the part of the story that deals with the arrival of our rabbit heroes at Watership Down. In the book, we are a quarter of the way through the story. Here, in the 1978 film, we're a third of the way through. Most of the journey between Sandalford and Watership Down is skipped over in the book, the events at the Warren of the Snares having previously provided a satisfying moment of resolution, and as is also essentially the case here, with the exception of the briefly mentioned rat attack, which was transplanted to earlier in the narrative and shown on camera. But there is a major change in the film. In the book, we now find ourselves at the actual foot of Watership Down itself, with the group about to climb it to discover their new home. But not in the film, in which there is business to deal with first, that happens after the founding of the new Warren on Watership Down in the book. Some of this business will be terrifying, but we will come on to that in the next episode. This reordering of events was probably done due to the pacing requirements of such a summarised telling of the original story, where the focus needs to move south towards Ephrafah earlier in the story, given that we now have 2/3 of the runtime to tell 3/4 of the story. Very soon we will encounter an example of such reordered telling of the story being taken to ridiculous extremes, but not yet. In the book, the initial raid on Nuthanger Farm by Hazel and Pipkin takes place after the arrival of Captain Holly at the foot of the down, his recovery from that terrible journey, and his then setting off with Silver, Buckthorn and Strawberry as emissaries to Ephrafah, which Keehar has discovered due to the south of Watership Down. It is the beginning of Hazel's most ill-judged decisions of leadership, as he fantasises about Holly arriving back on the down to already find those there thanks to Hazel. Here, Holly and Keehar have yet to appear, and Hazel has nothing to show off about to the departed Holly. In fact, the absence of Doze does not seem to have occurred to the group yet. So why the raid on the farm? Here there is no Keehar to report rabbits being kept in a hutch there, and this was clearly no raid for Flayra, as they go straight for the buildings. In any case, this section begins with the rabbits arriving at a traditional farm cart as the theme from the previous section ends. How likely is it that a group of rabbits would rest underneath such a human object? They are clearly very tired and fall immediately asleep, with Hazel looking out about briefly before falling asleep himself. Cut to early the following morning, and Hazel wakes up first, sniffing the air. He whispers for Pipkin and suggests they go to have a look around the farm. Has he smelt rabbits? Is that what replaces Kehar's airborne intelligence in this version? One sniff of the air? Pipkin is understandably reluctant, mentioning cats and dogs, and edges away back to where he was sleeping. This is similar to his reaction in the book while in the newly dug warren on Watership Down. Hazel says he has a plan, but doesn't detail it. He is also insistent that it must be just him and Pipkin who go. But here the basis of his plan seems shaky at best, while in the book it is based on sound information and we get to know his reasoning in detail. This is not possible in a film without Hazel narrating his plan, but it isn't entirely clear how he could have one in these circumstances. Cut to a panning shot of a working farm in 1960s Hampshire, and this is definitely the 60s, as we will learn in a minute. As we hear a cockerel crowing, the camera zooms in on an elevated barn with a dog kennel in front of it. Cut to a close-up of a plough by the barn, with the stone toadstool shapes the barn rests upon visible. These stone stands can still sometimes be seen in British gardens as decorations. In fact, my grandparents had one, but they originally had an entirely practical purpose, as elevated barns could be kept free of rats. Hazel emerges from between the blades of the plough, sniffs, and is followed by Pipkin, who says he can see a dog. Hazel has not seen it, unlike in the book, and says just to give it a wide berth. They dodge behind the kennel under the barn. A tense musical theme plays as they reach the end of the barn. And now we hear a detail of the human world that lets us know when the makers of this film have decided the story is set. As Hazel and Fiver make their way across the yard, we hear a voice on a radio say, quote, BBC Home Service, and now, end quote. The rest of the sentence is drowned out by Pipkin pointing out that the humans are up. The BBC Home Service was the domestic counterpart to the still existing BBC World Service. It ran from 1939 until 1967, the year I was born, when it was replaced by BBC Radio 4. So the makers of the film decided that Watership Down was set at least 5 years before it was published in 1972. I'm not aware of any evidence of this being the case in the book. Pipkin does his sideways shuffle again and says he wants to go back, but Hazel says they will just go a little bit further. They dodge behind a woodpile by the entrance to another barn, then look through a crack in the door where they see a rabbit hutch, which Pipkin instantly recognises as such. How would he know this? Hazel goes straight in, and we see the interior of the kind of timber-beamed British barn that these days would more likely have been converted into an expensive house or a wedding venue. But here it is very much a workspace, with a dirty barrel, old tools, and something dripping. Hazel reassures Pipkin it's safe and tells him to stand guard and let him know if he sees a cat. Pipkin reacts with nervous amusement at the very idea, but Hazel is serious. And now we cut to the interior of the rabbit hutch, where we see 3 sleeping rabbits. All are pale in colour, as opposed to the various types mentioned in the book. In this film, the origin of rabbits tends to be clearly signalled by their physical appearance. So here, hutch rabbits are all pale, while Warren of the Snares rabbits all had sad eyes with drooping lids, and Ephrathans, well, we will come on to them. Hazel introduces himself, and Clover, the first doe to speak in the book, reciprocates, though in the film she was beaten to it by poor Violet. In the book, this conversation is with the buck Boxwood, with Clover's contribution only being reported, and her speech is not directly quoted until the next chapter, the raid. But here the raid will have to wait until they get to Watership Down and meet Kehar. She asks where Hazel comes from, to which he responds with an ambiguous "far away," and immediately starts selling his lifestyle by saying that he and his friends live as they please, eating grass and lying in the sun. Hazel seems to very much have inviting them to join him in mind, but we need to remember this is before the doe problem has been identified, and Kehar is asked to look for possible sources of does, so what is he playing at? As he is extolling the virtues of life in the wild, we cut to Pipkin on the lookout, and then the dog waking up, just as Hazel mentions lying in the sun. The juxtaposition seems deliberate. He asks if they ever get out, to which she replies that a human child sometimes takes them out on the grass. As Clover says this, we see Pipkin startle. He has seen a cat. Hazel seems to be getting to his point, asking if they would like to join them. Clover is confused and asks how this would be possible, but we never get to hear Hazel's answer, as Pipkin arrives in a panic to let him know about the cat. In the book, Hazel gets to outline his plan for the hutch rabbits joining them to Boxwood before the arrival of the cat, but here he is forced to give a garbled version, backing away from the hutch rapidly, oddly jumping backwards onto a pile of hay without looking before leaping in the direction of the barn door. You can almost visualise John Hurt backing away from the microphone in a recording studio. His tone of mock nonchalance only just holds up, and then changes once out of earshot of the hutch rabbits. He has to get them away safe and seems to know exactly what to do. Pipkin says he thinks the cat has smelt them, to which Hazel replies he will get them away. Where and when has Hazel learned these cat handling skills? It is made clear in the book that he has barely travelled away from the warren at Sandalford prior to this journey. The escape from the cat proceeds much as it does in the book. Hazel tells Pipkin to follow him closely and run when he does. Pipkin nervously repeats these instructions. As he is giving these, they both leave the cover of the barn and deliberately come into plain view of the cat. The camera zooms out to bring it into view, tail waving in readiness to pounce. As the cat hisses, Hazel begins to taunt it, saying how hungry it looks and how the rats must be getting too clever. As Hazel adds that he doesn't think the cat can run at all, the dog, now fully awake, begins to bark. This is all getting a bit intense, but Hazel just keeps up the steady stream of insults, Pipkin looking at him as if thinking he must be mad. In the book, the cat has nothing to say at this point, but here it responds to the suggestion that it cannot run with a calm "you'll see" as it drums its claws on the ground in mock calm. As Hazel repeats his opinion on whether it can run, the cat screams and leaps, but the two rabbits are already gone. A cat has to get a rabbit immediately, or they are too fast to be caught, and this cat has failed, Hazel's insults having seemingly done their job and making it act hastily. In the book, this plan is all Hazel needs to get them both away. He says cats hate looking silly and don't bother pursuing once an initial pounce has failed. But here things are a little different. To the accompaniment of a curiously light musical theme, the cat pursues them, making Hazel's calm planning look a little less safe. They circle one of the raised barn stone supports, just missing the now very agitated dog, before dashing past a door of the farmhouse, where Pipkin accidentally runs into a dustbin. This startles the pursuing cat and brings a human girl to the door. This must be Lucy, though she is only named in the film credits. We hear her say, "What's all that then?" Then she sees the cat and says, "Tab, Tab, let her alone, cruel thing." This is an English West Country dialect phrase meaning "let them alone," while Tab is the imaginative name the cat has been given, due presumably to being a tabby cat. As she speaks, we see Hazel actually stop and look back before rounding a corner of the house. The cat follows him, but the human's instruction to leave the rabbits alone hilariously works, and Tab now reappears, now in cute mode for the benefit of the human. Anyone who lives with cats will be all too familiar with this switch from killer to cutie, though I'm not sure it would work in mid-pursuit as it does here. However, this added episode with Lucy has foreshadows her later rescue of Hazel from the cat during the Battle of Watership Down. Without our getting to see the chapter Dea Ex Machina, the only one from a human perspective in the book, this episode has been Lucy's only chance to demonstrate why Hazel is rescued by her. We have also learned the name of the cat and heard her speak earlier. Having reassured Lucy of its cuteness, Tab now sits in the lane cleaning herself as she watches the rapidly retreating Hazel and Pipkin running up a lane. With an ironic and feline-sounding violin flourish, the camera fades to black. Comparison with the book. Events are now being significantly reordered in the telling of the story, and some of this reordering will simply not make sense if you look at it too closely, as is the tendency of this podcast. Why does Hazel suddenly decide to take the smallest member of his party on a random raid to a farm they happen to be resting near, while their dangerous journey to Watership Down is far from over? Did he smell the hutch rabbits? Was he already thinking about the doe problem? It is Hazel who later first mentions the issue of the new warren having no does, as he does at greater length in the book. Could we be generous and just say this is a more opportunistic Hazel? Fiver later seems to confirm this with a line I must admit I had never taken in before, when he says, "So that's why you went to that farm," in response to Hazel mentioning does. A line that isn't necessary in the book, where Hazel's initial expedition with Pipkin is well explained to the reader, even though it is still undertaken as a way of showing off to the rabbits who have set off to a large warren to the south, in a quest to see if any does there want to join them. That warren being Ephrafa, more of which soon. Hazel's conversation with the hutch rabbits is exclusively with Clover here. the second instance of the film giving greater emphasis to female characters. However, tragically, Clover's significant role in the new warren in the book will be denied, as not one hutch rabbit will be liberated in the latest second raid on Nuthanger Farm. She joins poor Violet in obscurity, though she at least gets to live. And then there is the issue of how they both get away from the cat. In the book, Hazel is well in control of their escape from Tab, but that escape, while impressive, was probably not exciting enough for the film, so Hazel is not granted quite as much control here, with Pipkin's collision with a dustbin possibly being the only reason they get away safely. Also, it must be said that a farm cat in 1960s Britain would not have been very likely to switch to cute mode with humans, as, simply put, it would not have been given food by humans, being expected to catch its own. In fact, that was the only reason for a farm to have cats then. To this extent, the more vicious Tab of the book, lashing out at Lucy as she saves Hazel in Dea Ex Machina, is far more realistic. I may love cats, but I'm not so naive as to think they would bother acting cute towards we humans if we didn't feed them. And for most of our history we have tended not to, as a hungry cat is an excellent method of pest control. So, overall, Hazel's status as leader seems to be diminished by the demands of filmmaking. We only hear his internal monologue once, when he speaks directly to Frith, and are left largely guessing what he is up to much of the time. He has lost a member of his party, their only doe. He did not look as authoritative at the arrival of the Warren of the Snares, and now he has seemingly placed the smallest member of the group at significant risk from a cat, seemingly on a whim. This Hazel is going to have to buck up his ideas pretty soon. Next time, Bigwig has a terrifying encounter, and we learn of the fate of Sandalford Warren in one of the most shocking sequences in the entire film.